Hey everyone. So I just wanted to jump in here really quickly and share with you that my friend Dimitriy just asked me to come on and do an interview for his YouTube channel, which is all about judo, really, and a lot of judo for kids in particular, but also for the adults as well. But he's just starting to transition to doing a little bit more podcasting, and he's starting to have on more holistic health practitioners. And so he wanted to talk to me specifically about breathing and breathing for athletes, breathing for athletic performance, breathing for focus, breathing for energy. So I think it's a pretty good interview, and I want to direct you guys to go watch the full-length interview. I'll leave the link in the video description. I think it'll be a really good foundation for those of you who come to me with questions of how do I really apply breathing into my daily life? How do I apply it so that I can get the most out of it? And again, particularly in conjunction with this desire for improved focus, improved concentration, better energy management, better energy production, and also for improved gains in your performance. I also wanted to share just a quick 5-minute clip from that video that I extracted because I think it's really pertinent to a lot of you in my audience. So I know a lot of you are huge Wim Hof fanatics and you practice religiously, and that's awesome. I also know a lot of you practice both Wim Hof and oxygen advantage exercises, and you're able to make that work without any issue. And then I also know there's some of you who have either struggled with Wim Hof or you've been dedicated to it for years and suddenly you're starting to maybe not feel as optimized from that breath practice as you used to, and you're starting to kind of shift into other breathing techniques. And so a lot of questions come up about this difference between Wim Hof and oxygen advantage, particularly when it comes to our style of breath holding, and they are very different. And so I have answered this question for many of you privately, but I've never actually made a formal video about it. Mostly because I don't really want to start a big controversy. I'm not in the mood to fight about it, I just want to share information. But because it came up in this interview and we really just touched on it surface level, but I still think it gives a pretty clear understanding, at least between the baseline difference between Wim Hof breathing and oxygen advantage breathing, particularly when we're talking about the style of breath holding. So I'm going to leave that little segment for you here, and then I'm going to refer to the full interview again in the video description, and I hope you'll go check out the full interview because I think there is a lot of information in there that I haven't spoken about on this channel that might be valuable to you. And then if you feel so compelled, maybe you'll also consider supporting Dimitriy's channel with a subscribe or a like or a comment, and just share a little bit of the love over there. I hope you enjoy this segment, and I'll see you soon.
What do you think about Wim Hof? Because that's cold exposure, but it also has to do with the breath. To me personally, again, I haven't quite opened my mind to Wim Hof because the over breathing that he does in the beginning, that's, I'm a little bit prejudiced against that, but maybe I have to change that too. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm also a little prejudiced against it. So I've actually practiced a lot of Wim Hof. I've taken a lot of the trainings, and a lot of my colleagues teach both oxygen advantage and Wim Hof. So I do have some insight here. So remember I said there's different types of breath holding, and the type of breath holding we do is hypoxic, low oxygen, hypercapnic, high CO2. Wim Hof breath holds are hypoxic, low oxygen, hypocapnic, low CO2. So his style of breathing dumps all the CO2. Now, what we find anecdotally, it has its benefits, that breath hold, but I don't think of it as something for sports performance, honestly, because you're not getting that CO2 tolerance piece. And what we have found anecdotally now
is because of all the hyperventilation.
Yes.
That
yes.
Prior to holding. Does he hold his breath also on the exhale?
Yeah, so they do about 20 or 30 big breaths. They blow off all the CO2 so that their mind doesn't get the warning signal. That's why people who practice Wim Hof can hold their breath for 4 or 5 minutes, because they don't get the warning bells. They're not going into acidity, right? So you do those, so you blew off all the CO2, and now people hold their breath 4, 5, 6 minutes. The CO2 doesn't even recover during the breath hold. And then they go into another round, blowing off more CO2, and then a long breath hold. The CO2 is never recovering. So what I find is with really elite people, they can practice this for certain things. Some people like to do it for positive immune response. They find that it helps their immune system. But anybody who is already sensitive to CO2 and has a very poor CO2 tolerance, when they tend to practice these hyperventilation techniques, their CO2 tolerance gets worse. And it really negatively impacts their performance, their resilience, their experience of anxiety, of stress. So I don't recommend it. The people who usually find me and work with me have special needs, and we don't do that. We're trying to correct their breathing and make them more tolerant to CO2, and the reduced breathing, the less breathing, is way more beneficial for them and way more functional long term. So I don't want to say anything negative about Wim Hof. There's definitely a time and place for it. But what I find is people who practice it for a long time often start to see, oh, wow, it's starting to impact other aspects of my life, maybe not as optimally as I had hoped.
Well, whatever it is, I thank you very much for explaining this, because before it was like, well, they're different. I like to understand the reason behind things, you know, and you understand the explanation of hypercapnic versus hypocapnic. That made a
Hypocapnic,
lot of
yeah.
sense. Yes.
Yeah.
So how about are there any benefits to holding the breath on the inhale that are not covered by the holding the breath on the exhale?
You can do it. You know, it's more challenging on the exhale and you just get the benefits faster. So, you know, people who are training free diving, right? So like the mermaids, people who train like that, when they practice their breath holds, they'll often hold on the inhale, because you would never go underwater on an exhale. Doesn't make sense. You want your lungs to be filled, right? So when they practice on dry land, right, they'll take as big of an inhale as they can and hold their breath. So there can be benefits to that too. And you're definitely going to work on your CO2 tolerance. Why? Because you're not taking that initial exhale to blow off some of the CO2. But because your lungs are filled with air, this kind of dispersal, this exchange of CO2 and O2 is so much slower, because there's so much more oxygen in the lungs still that has to disperse into the blood, and the CO2 has to come into the lungs. Whereas if I take my exhale, the lungs are more condensed already, and this process is happening much faster. So in terms of adaptation for sports, we tend to practice that way, because think about a sport like judo. There's so much power involved. There's so much endurance. It's such high intensity, and you guys are gassing out fast, right? Like you don't have that many minutes before you're exhausted, right? Well, grappling is a really exhaustive sport, and that exhaustion is CO2 rising in the body, the muscles getting more acidic, not being able to handle the acidity, you know, and you just like have to like give up and take a break. So I just feel like this type of breath hold trains you better for your sport.